All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with this presentation. Our presentation day is on fall lawn care. So we're getting put to the point in time that we're thinking about fall, and I thought it'd be a good time to talk about what we need to do with our lawn during this time period. So let's see if I can advance my slides. There we go. So the main things I'm going to go over today are cut and height, fertility, reseeding and establishment, aerating, tree leaves, mower maintenance, and weed control. So the age-old question that I get asked a lot and people fight about quite a bit is, how tall do I cut my grass at? There's a general rule that gets thrown out a lot, and that's the 1/3 rule. So never more than 1/3 of the leaf area, leaving at least 1/3 of it there. If we look at that a little bit more specifically, we need to break it down, our lawns, into what kind of lawn do we have? Do we have cool season, which would be your tall fescues, your bluegrasses, ryegrass, those sort of things, or do we have a warm season lawn? So do we have Bermuda grass or Zakoza grass and things like that? For my county, every now and then somebody will try to play with Bermuda grass or Zakoza grass, but for the most part, most of our lawns are going to be a fescue mix, bluegrass mix. So if we look at that, like tall fescue actually needs to be cut a little bit taller, so they need to be left at 3 or 4 inches tall. Your other grasses that are cool season grasses, they can go down to 2 to 3.5. So if you look at that, basically if you'll leave about 3 inches, you'll be hitting that target on cool season grasses. As far as how often we need to mow, in the spring and the fall, depending on the weather, you're looking at 4 to 5 days, but I mean, it really depends on the weather. Warm season grasses, we normally don't deal with St. Augustine grass, but they're usually 3 to 4 inches. And then your Bermudas and Zakoas and stuff, they're going to be 1 or 2 inches. The way they grow, they actually spread, they have stolons, and so they're able to take a tighter mowing pressure. So 1 to 2 inches, and it's also the reason why, they really like them at golf courses and things. So 1 to 2 inches on them is perfectly fine. So now that we've kind of looked and thought about that, we can go on to fertility. And so we did a presentation in the spring about fertility that kind of goes more over soils in general. We're going to highlight a few things in there, but if you have a lot of questions about that, that might be a good place to go. You can go on our Facebook and review that presentation. But soil sampling is really the only way to know. I get asked a lot, well, can I use one of these store-bought kits? You can, but it may not give you the full picture. And to be honest, they usually cost as much as just doing a soil test through your state. So Virginia Tech does our soil testing in Virginia, and it's about $10 for lawns. You can go to your extension office, they'll have the boxes, and they'll have information how to take the sample. And you need to sample about every 3 to 5 years, or if there's an issue going on. In general, we recommend you need to take 5 to 10 subsamples, and you're going to get them throughout your garden, and you need to go 3 or 4 inches down, and it needs to be a subsample. You need to take an actual cross section of it, not just off the top. But why would we care about fertility in the fall? Fall is an excellent time to fertilize, but we need to also remember that, like for your warm season grasses, you don't want to fertilize in the fall too aggressively because you could cause some winter injury. So if you've got warm seasons, you need to kind of be thinking about that. So one of our big kickers is soil pH, and soil pH determines how much nutrients are actually available. This is a chart I went over in the soils presentation. You've got pH on the bottom, and then you have the different soil nutrients and how they're available based on the band side. The wider and the green means they're more available, red not so available. So fall's a good time to go ahead and lime because it gives it enough time to interact with the soil chemistry and be available, and these nutrients can go through their processes and be available. When you soil test, they'll actually tell you how much lime per 1,000 square foot. So it gives it down to a smaller unit size that you don't have to worry so much. Some more about fertility. Fall fertilization of phosphorus, potassium is really great because they have to go through chemical processes. Unless it's a liquid format, if it's a granular format, it's going to have to go some different processes. So it's great to go ahead and do that in the fall because we don't readily lose them through weathering processes and stuff. So We don't lose them through leaching and that sort of thing as readily. So they're going through the chemical processes and they should be there when we need them in the spring. Most lawn fertilizer in the state of Virginia and several other states does not contain phosphorus if it's labeled for maintenance. We do have a concern for the Chesapeake Bay and algae blooms and nutrient loads that's going into Chesapeake Bay. So in general, to help fight that, phosphorus will not be in your bag of labeled maintenance, okay? But for establishment fertilizer, it will contain phosphorus because it's important for germination. So some things about fall fertilization for nitrogen. So nitrogen is a good time to put on, nitrogen on in the fall. And the reason why is it gives a little bit of boost to that plant so that it will develop a root system. Because in the fall, it's not thinking so much about trying to develop a seed head, that it will use that nitrogen to try to go ahead and make bigger, nicer roots that in the spring, when it comes back, it will be a better, stronger plant. You can use water-soluble types of nitrogen, or you can use what's called slow-release nitrogen. When you use water-soluble nitrogen, that can leach. It can, with rain and that sort of stuff, can be an issue. Whenever we use water-soluble nitrogen, we need to realize that it can also evaporate, so to speak. So a lot of times we want to do it right before rain, but not too much rain, or we're going to have to irrigate. It can burn our lawn if it sits there and nothing else happens with it. But we kind of recommend for water-soluble sources of nitrogen that you do smaller amounts at different times. And we'll show that here in a minute. Slow release has kind of a coating on it that keeps it from just automatically being in the soil solution. And it just slowly releases that over time. And you can spread a little bit more of that because of that. And it reduces the chance of leaching. So here is from a publication from Virginia Tech, and it kind of goes through like when to put down nitrogen and how much for different nitrogen sources and different types of lawns. And this kind of gives you a highlight, and I've got this in here. I'm not going to go over it too much, but you can see like September and October, November, they're recommending it here for your cool season lawns. And then you can look over across, and they do recommend it for your Bermuda grasses and your St. Augustine grasses. So this is another one. This is for slow release nitrogen. The first one was for water soluble. This is for your slow release. And it has its recommendations, and a lot of it's in the fall. And then if you look for this, this is the other type of nitrogen sources that are slow released, that are a little bit higher. And also, again, mainly focused on the fall. So some general rule of thumbs that traditionally we don't want to exceed more than 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of water source. For slow release, you can move that on up to 3 to 4.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet whenever you do an application. And this is single application we're talking about here. So what we're talking about is not 1 pound of fertilizer, it's 1 pound of actual nitrogen. So whenever you buy fertilizer, it comes as N, P, and K. For example, 10-10-10. So 10-10-10 is 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. So there's only 10% nitrogen in that bag. So for me to get 1 pound of nitrogen, I need 10 pounds of 10-10-10, and I've done that math there for you. 1 pound of nitrogen divided by 0.1 equals 10 pounds. And that's the recommendation basically. So if you were using 10-10-10, you would not apply more than 10 pounds per 1,000 square foot. Here is a nice chart. This kind of already does the math for you. And this is also from another Virginia Tech publication that I've got down there at the bottom that you can go straight to. And it's also on my resource page. And it tells you how much to put out, depending on how much nitrogen pounds you want to put out, and different analysis of different fertilizers. Seeding and establishment. Fall is a great time to go ahead and seed and establish, especially cool season grasses. Warm season grasses, you won't establish now, but in a lot of warm season grass yards, people will use ryegrass. And now is the time to also do ryegrass. So usually you need some kind of preparation. If it's a complete establishment, you're going to have to till and actually go ahead and create a seed bed for that. If you're just going to reseed, you could do aerification, or you can, a lot of times you'll see them out on a ball course or something like that, and they'll take and drag like chains and stuff. You need some seed content, seed to soil contact. So you'll have to do something like that to try to get some contact. Now, if it's already bare and there's just soil, nothing there, you can go ahead and spread as well then too. But you need to have that soil to seed contact to kind of prevent, to get that. Reason why we like the fall, and we need to be planting like August, September right now, is that it gives a chance for that plant to get up, go ahead and be growing, but enough time for it to go ahead and go through the shutdown process, so then spring it's ready to go. First is establishing in the spring, that plant's having to go through the whole process, and it's starting from the very start, and then you start mowing it, and it can be a weaker plant. So fall is a really good time to establish especially cool season grasses. And there's different varieties of grasses, and some of them do better than others. So you can go to the store and you can pick up Kentucky 31 fescue, and you can establish your lawn with that. But that has not been designed to be a lawn grass. So that's been more established for pastures. So this is actually a publication that Virginia Tech puts out every year. This is not all of it, but this has got some of the tall fescue recommendations. This gives you actual variety names that are good and used to be used for yards. And then you can refer back to that. So I mentioned aeration before. Not a lot of people do this. Sometimes it's needed. A lot of times you'll see them do it in areas of high traffic. So when you go to a school or you go to some kind of public entity, a lot of times they will aerate the soil. If the area receives a lot of traffic, it can especially help. What it does is that it takes out a little small plug of soil out of the ground. And it gives the ability for water to enter in. It kind of breaks up that compaction without having to rip it. And so in agriculture, we would actually have like a deep shank that we would rip the soil with. For lawns, we really can't do this, so that's what we do. And when there's actually a picture there of a walk-behind aerator. Some different places actually rent these out. Some of these tool equipment places and things like that will rent these out. And it just helps with dealing with that potential issue. And it can be really good if you can do it before they go into dormancy. So this time of year, about 6 weeks before they go into dormancy, is a really great time. Some different pointers about it. You want the ground to be moist but not wet. So if you have to water the ground, and here it has a recommendation of 1 inch of water for irrigation or rainfall before you do this. But if it gets too wet, if it's just absolutely sloppy, muddy, you don't want to do this. It needs just to be moist, and you need to do it in 2 different directions. So you need to go one direction with the aerator and then another direction. And this just kind of helps. So if you've had problems with your lawn, especially with compaction, maybe it's a recent built house and the lawn's not been real established and stuff, this might be a good answer for you. Tree leaves. Fall is known for these pretty tree leaves. And as we think about tree leaves, then we also think about the fact that they're going to shed their leaves in the fall. And though it's pretty, it can be a pain. Of course, a thick layer of leaves blocks sun and can reduce turf growth because of shading. And it can also hold and trap moisture and increase some diseases. But leaves are very important for nutrient cycling back in the soil for those trees. So it's a double-edged sword. Some things that we can do for leaf management. Of course, we can collect those leaves and we can compost them and maybe use them in the garden, or even use them back underneath the trees later on if we're mulching the trees. We can use a mulching mower. And leave the leaves in place. So the picture to the right there is from a Virginia Tech publication, and they used a mulching mower, and all it did was just take the mower through the leaves, and it breaks them up into smaller pieces and moves them around. And so that they're there, but they're not shedding out that turf grass and they're not causing as much of a problem. And that's kind of one of the newer things that they've really been pushing lately in turf grass is doing something like this. Of course, you can rake the leaves and back them up and throw them away the best you can, or even using a mower to collect the leaves and bag them up. But if you can keep those nutrients back in your lawn, that's a really great thing to do. Realizing that pine needles are specifically harder to deal with. Pine trees really like lower pH, and those pine needles will create a lower pH underneath them. So quite often the areas under pine trees will kind of just become its own ecosystem, and lawn doesn't grow so well underneath them. In that case, with those pine needles, maybe you can go ahead and rake them up and use them. Like say you have blueberries, you could use them to kind of help keep your blueberries acidic and remove them from the area to try to keep the turf grass going. But pines can be a little bit harder to deal with. Mower maintenance. So fall is a great time to do mower maintenance, and there's some stuff that we need to be doing to our mowers in the fall anyways, before the winter. So we need to stabilize the fuel. So if a mower goes more than 30 days without being used, you really need a fuel stabilizer. It costs about $10 at the local garden store or what have you. And before you store it in the winter, it needs that in there, or else you're going to have somebody go through and fix it, and there could be issues. Another thing is just changing the oil, making sure that the oil's in good shape before you put it back in the fall. And it's just a good time in the season. Get ready to put up the mower, go ahead and change oil and have it ready. Keeping the deck clean. It's also a good time. Go ahead, clean out the deck, make sure it's all taken care of before you put it up, and sharpening the blades. These two things could wait till the deck needs to be cleaned in the fall just because you don't want to overwinter with it. But the sharpening the blades, you could wait till the spring. But if you're already into doing a bunch of stuff, why not go ahead and sharpen the blades as well and get that done. The last two things, they could also be spring maintenance as well, but as you're into it, I recommend you think about it. But replacing your fuel filter would be a good time to do that as you put it up, and servicing your belt and making sure all your belts are in good shape. All right, now we come to the part where everybody asks me about. Usually when I get asked about lawns, it's more about what's this weed and how do I kill it? So when I talk about weed control, we really need to focus and think about why that weed is there. Why is it so persistent there? And there's a couple of things that we can do culturally to kind of prevent from having weeds. So a lot of these we already talked about. So cutting height, if we cut too tight on cool season grasses, those plants don't do as well and weeds persist. Fertility. If the fertility is not right, then there's some weeds that has more advantage in poor soils than others. Or maybe the variety. Maybe it's a variety that doesn't do very good as a lawn, can cause issues. Maybe we need to aerate to try to keep down some compaction. Irrigation helps as well as keeping our plants going. Dealing with our clipping management. So if we're got a pretty good thatch, from clippings, that can be an issue. Mower maintenance, which really this is more about sharpening your blades really, but having a nice clean cut can also help keep that grass being more competitive than the weeds. Proper site selection. And so this is a picture and you can see that there's water just standing. That's an area that you're always going to have problems with. And it's just the problem is the site. Maybe we can try to do something with that, but the way that area of that lawn looks like it's probably always going to be a wet spot. And just do, we might be able to put in some drainage or something like that. So we could do some site improvement. So those are some things we can do before we try to use any kind of sprays or anything. But some weeds I get asked about, and I've kind of picked some of the most common ones I get asked about. One of them is chickweed. So chickweed is pretty common. It's a low spreading winter annual. And sometimes it can be a kind of a weak perennial, but it forms a really dense mat. It really likes moisture, deals well with shade. You'll find it a lot of times like on the edges of your flower garden and your grass, and sometimes it'll just take over grass. So it's a pretty common problem that we'll see people ask about. So when you're looking at what should I control it with, if we've gone through all the cultural controls that we can, And then we need to think about spraying. We can go to our pest management guide from Virginia Tech or Virginia Cooperative Extension. And as we look at this, it gives us a couple options. So this chart has a couple different ones on there, but it does have chickweed on there. And as we look at it, we have some different herbicides, and they have like 2,4-D dicamba, 2,4-D MCPP. They're listed like that. Those are mainly kind of like the active ingredients because there's so many products out here. So you have to look on the label and it will have active ingredients, and you're looking for these active ingredients on there whenever you go shopping because there's just so many different products labeled. So if we look here at chickweed and we go across, it says S for all of these, and I go down and look and it says weed is susceptible, often good control, 70% or higher. So all these products for common chickweed will do a really good job, and it says they need to be used in spring and fall. So we're getting ready for fall. This is when we can control in the fall. There's another type of chickweed beside of it, and you can tell that it doesn't do as well with the others. So if you don't know which type you have, you may want to look at the others. So the next one I get asked a lot about is henbit. A lot of times people get this one confused for purple dead nettle, but henbit's very common. We see it in the spring, and it'll be one of the first things there. It's a winter annual. It's very pretty, but a lot of times people ask me, how do I get rid of this out of my yard? And if we look at the spray guide, and there's several one on here, but if you look towards the bottom, you see henbit. And you can see that the first two don't do really well with those products. They do okay, but not great, but they do well with the others. So if we're wanting to combat chickweed and henbit, we kind of know to push ourselves more towards the right part of this. And if you look here, it says henbit fall. Fall is the time to get rid of henbit. All right. Another one I get asked about is garlic and onions that pop up in people's yards. Again, you'll see them in the spring. They're winter perennials. They'll emerge in the late fall from a bulb, and then they'll grow through the winter and spring. And a lot of times people will worry about them in the spring, but the time to take care of them is now. So we can look here what some products that we can use. So we've got wild onion there, and you can see across all of them. It's just hard to deal with. So all the products, you can use them, but just realize it's going to take a lot of time, and it's just you're going to slowly weaken them as you use these products. All right. And the last one, plantains. People like to shoot these and that sort of stuff. They're a very common one. You'll see it's a perennial. When we look at kind of our spray guide here, and we find, let's see here, plantains. Then we look through here, we can control them in spring and fall, and it's pretty susceptible. It's pretty good with all of those products. So if we're trying to hit all of those different plants that we just looked at that are pretty common, the 2,4-D dicamba plus MCPP, it seemed to hit across the board. The 2,4-D dicamba plus tripichlor did, and the 2,4-D dicamba and the pitstyrlum, I'm not very good at that one, all did really good to control across the board. So those are the products we need to look at. Now, sometimes I get asked about organic options. One of the most common organic options is actually corn gluten meal. And what it does is it produces a chemical that inhibits the lateral roots from actually growing. And if you do it at the time that the weeds are germinating, the survival of the weeds is really reduced. And it's also got nitrogen in it. Now that can be good and that can be bad. You can use so much of it that you can cause problems with nitrogen and maybe getting even the weeds more interested in growing. But it's short-lived. That chemical it produces is short-lived, only lasts about 2 or 3 weeks. So over time, it may not work as well. And there's also some issues with it possibly degrading the soil. So it's just something that can work, but it has some negative effects, but so does everything else. Some other things you can look at, and a lot of times this goes across Facebook. Every year you'll have somebody that makes a recommendation of using vinegar and using salt and mixing up and having a spray with it. There is some products that are already mixed up ready to do that. It's non-selective. The thing that worries me about when people make their own mix, especially using salt degrades the soil, and they can salt their ground to the point that other things can't grow. So that kind of concerns me whenever people kind of make their own mix. And also vinegar, quite often, what you can buy at the normal store is going to be like 5%, and you need more like 20% to really hit weeds of acetic acid. So mixing your own may not be the best plan, but there are products, and it's got products listed here of some things that you can get. There's some others on here. The corn gluten is listed here of some products that you can buy that have a label that you can follow and make sure that you're doing them right. Some other things like acetic acid is on here, but buying a product that's actually labeled for this to do it would be better in my opinion than trying to make kind of a home brew. All right, here is all our wonderful resources that you can get. And if you want a copy of this presentation, you can email me or call me and we can get it to you. And Virginia Tech does a really good job, or Virginia Corporate Extension does a really good job. They have several specialists in turf grass. Dr. Goatley especially does a lot of these publications. If you just saw, he's written or co-wrote. And then he also does like a podcast, Turf and Garden Tips podcast, and this is the link to it, and you can listen to some of his presentations from there. So it's a really great resource. And here's my basic contact information if you have any questions. Thank you.